For 2,000 years, we have been told a very simple story about Easter morning. We imagine the earth shaking. We imagine a blazing angel descending from the sky to roll away the massive stone door. And we imagine Jesus of Nazareth stepping out of the dark tomb and into the light. But what if I told you that is not what happened? According to the terrifying and glorious visions of Blessed Anne Catherine Emmerich, the stone was never moved to let the king out. It was moved to show the world that he was already gone. What actually transpired in the pitch-black darkness of that sealed cave in the microscopic fractions of a second before the dawn of the third day is a mystery so profound that it shatters our human understanding of life, physics, and death. Emmerich, the famous 19th century mystic, was granted a privilege that borders on the incomprehensible. Her spirit was taken directly through the solid rock of the Holy Sepulchre. She was placed inside the cold, sealed tomb, standing shoulder to shoulder with the angels. Tonight, we will not look at the empty tomb. We will enter it while it is still occupied. We will witness the exact breathtaking moment when the divine soul violently reclaimed his murdered flesh. Outside the cave, the hardened Roman guards paced in the cold night air, guarding a dead man, completely oblivious that they were standing on the fault line of eternity. But inside the tomb, there was only silence. Listen now to the exact words of the mystic. Step into the darkness and witness the breath of eternity.
I was taken in spirit into the deepest, coldest darkness of the Holy Sepulchre. It was a darkness so heavy, so absolute, that it felt like it could crush the breath out of my lungs. But as my spiritual eyes slowly began to adjust to the gloom, I realized that the cavern was not entirely devoid of light. There, resting upon the cold, hard stone slab, was the ruined body of my sweet Jesus. He was tightly wrapped in his burial shrouds, bound with heavy strips of linen that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus had saturated with myrrh and aloes. Even through the thick, spice-soaked cloths, my soul could sense the horrific destruction of his flesh, the devastating lacerations of the scourging, the deep, dark bruises, the absolute draining of his precious blood. It was all hidden beneath the white fabric, a silent monument to the cruelty of men. He was so still, so terribly still. But he was not alone in the dark. At the head and at the foot of the stone bed, I saw two majestic, heavenly angels. They radiated a subdued, solemn, almost mourning light. They did not speak. They did not move a single feather. They were bowed low to the ground in a posture of continuous, eternal adoration before the ruined tabernacle of his physical body. The silence in the tomb was louder than any storm. I waited, trembling, scarcely daring to breathe. And then the atmosphere in the cavern shifted. I felt a sudden, rushing warmth, a vibration of pure, overwhelming love that made my soul weep. I looked up. Passing straight through the solid, impenetrable rock ceiling of the cave, I saw a procession of blinding, magnificent light descending from the spiritual realm. It was the soul of my Lord. He was returning from his descent into hell. His soul appeared as a blazing orb of divine crystalline fire. It was a light so pure, so piercing, that human eyes would have melted at the sight of it. But he did not return alone. Following him, pouring into the cavern through the rock, was an innumerable host of angels, singing a silent, triumphant melody. And behind the angels came the liberated souls of the ancient patriarchs. I saw Adam and Eve weeping tears of indescribable gratitude. I saw Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I saw King David and Moses and the prophets. They were all glowing with a joy that words cannot contain. They had followed their Redeemer from the darkness of Limbo to witness his absolute final triumph over the grave. The tomb, once a place of cold despair, was now crowded with the glorious citizens of heaven. The patriarchs gathered around the stone slab, looking down at the mangled, wrapped corpse with deep reverence and awe. Then the multitude fell silent. The angels bowed even lower. I watched, shaking uncontrollably, as the luminous divine soul of Jesus hovered directly over his lifeless, shrouded corpse. For a fleeting second, the eternal and the mortal faced one another. And then the fusion occurred. In a fraction of a millisecond, a moment that my human mind could barely process, I saw the blazing soul of Christ descend. It did not sink into the body slowly. It struck the flesh like a bolt of divine lightning. I saw the soul enter him through the horrific gaping wound in his right side, the very same wound that the centurion's lance had torn open to drain the last drops of his mortal life. The transformation was instantaneous, and it was terrifyingly beautiful. The moment his divine soul touched the cold flesh, the pale, rigid limbs stirred beneath the tight linen bands. But this was not the mere waking of a dead man. This was not like Lazarus, who was brought back to his mortal body only to eventually die again. This was the birth of a completely new creation. Before my very eyes, his bruised, torn, and bloodless body was suddenly flooded with an overwhelming, consuming vitality. His flesh became perfectly pure. It became almost translucent, glowing from the inside with a bluish-white brilliance that chased every shadow out of the cavern. All the horrific lacerations from the Roman whips, all the deep purple bruises from the fists of the guards, the swelling on his holy face, the filth of the passion, they all vanished in a microsecond, swallowed up by the perfection of his glory. But there was one profound, beautiful exception. The 5 principal wounds, the holes in his hands, the piercings in his feet, and the massive tear in his side, they did not heal over. They remained wide open, but they were no longer bleeding, gruesome injuries. Instead, they had been transformed into small suns. I saw rays of piercing, brilliant light shooting out from the center of his wounded hands, illuminating the walls of the dark cave with beams of glory. The wound in his side shone like a furnace of divine love. These wounds were not scars of pain anymore. They were eternal, cosmic trophies of his absolute victory. Then I witnessed the supreme miracle of how he left his burial cloths. He did not unwrap himself. He did not struggle against the heavy spices and the tight linen bands that bound his arms and legs. Because his body was now glorified, it was no longer subject to the laws of our physical world. It had assumed the limitless properties of heaven. I saw him simply pass straight through the linen shroud. His glowing, living body phased through the cloth like light passing through glass. As he rose, the linens perfectly maintained the shape of his body for a brief second, holding the form of his head and chest, and then, with a soft sigh, they deflated. They collapsed flat onto the stone slab, completely empty, like a cocoon left behind by a creature that has taken flight. He stood before me in the center of the tomb. He was transcendently, blindingly beautiful. A garment of pure spiritual light formed around his magnificent frame, looking like a broad white mantle swirling softly around his limbs, like smoke caught in the brightest sunshine. He held a thin, brilliant white staff in his hand, from which floated a banner of absolute victory. The patriarchs bowed to the ground. The angels covered their faces. Death was dead. The author of life had won. He turned his glorious face toward the entrance of the tomb. The massive stone, sealed with wax and guarded by the empire of men, blocked the door. But my glorious Lord did not wait for the stone to be moved. With majestic silence, and with the entire host of heaven following behind him, he walked forward and simply passed straight through the solid, impenetrable rock of the cave wall, stepping out into the sleeping world.
It was at that exact fraction of a second, the very millisecond his glorified body passed through the rock wall, that the physical world violently reacted. The earth convulsed. The ground beneath the heavy boots of the Roman guards shook with a terrifying, deafening roar. This was not a natural earthquake. It was the shockwave of hell being shattered into pieces. At that same instant, an angel of the Lord,
described by Emmerich as dressed in the terrifying, blazing gear of a heavenly warrior, descended from the sky like a bolt of cosmic lightning. This angel did not come to let Jesus out. Jesus was already gone. The warrior angel came to declare to the universe that the grave had been conquered. The angel struck the massive stone, violently hurling it away from the entrance, and sat upon it. The impact was so severe that the lamps hanging around the exterior of the tomb shook violently, their flames roaring in the sudden wind of the Spirit.
The elite Roman guards, men who had slaughtered enemies across the empire and feared no mortal threat, were entirely broken by this display of divine power. Seeing the blazing angel and feeling the earth shatter beneath them, they fell to the ground as if struck down by an invisible hand. Emmerich watched them lie there, stiff, paralyzed with absolute terror, completely dazed and stripped of all human pride. When the violent tremor finally subsided, Cassius, the guard whose life had already been forever changed at the foot of the cross, managed to gather his trembling senses. Shaking with unimaginable fear, he crept toward the open entrance. He peered into the cold gloom of the cave. He saw no body. He saw no king. He only saw the empty, deflated linens lying exactly where the body had been, unraveled, resting perfectly flat on the stone. In fact, Emmerich reveals that at the exact moment the earthquake hit and the angel rolled the stone, Jesus was already miles away. He was appearing to his Blessed Mother on Mount Calvary, showing her his glowing, sun-like wounds, and finally wiping away the bitter tears of her Friday sorrow. The tomb was empty. The linens were flat. The stone was cast aside. When we look through the mystical, tear-filled lens of Anne Catherine Emmerich, the resurrection ceases to be just a historical story we hear once a year in Sunday school. It becomes a violent, magnificent, and overwhelming reality. A reality where the unbreakable laws of nature, the heavy stone, the tightly bound linen, and death itself had no choice but to bow, dissolve, and surrender before the glorified flesh of the Son of God.